Eugene Berriman was doing an interview, and he was just talking about 55. They steered him to the conversation, Oliveira, Islam, give us your take. And Coach Berriman's opinion, of course, really matters. This is one of the most successful coaches in the history of MMA, which, by the way, at least for me, this guy burst on the scene 2018, 2017, right? He's not all that, he's relatively new, at least for me, and has already moved himself into a position of one of the most successful coaches in the history, not of right now. You go back 20 years and have a hard time finding somebody whose resume can compete with Eugene Berriman. So, very good opinion to have. I don't know that he does an interview that I miss, and I generally try to grab something from it. All right. But he did talk about Oliveira, and he talked about Islam, and he came to the conclusion that the harder fight would be Oliveira because Oliveira is more well-rounded. Those were his words. But in the context of this conversation, it was clearly stating, therefore, Oliveira is better. Okay, fine. No big deal, just making sure that we've laid this out. Oliveira is better because Oliveira is more well-rounded. Now, that is a pitfall, depending on the time that you came into the sport. I suffered from this same pitfall as it pertained to wrestlers. There was a time in this sport. It started with Dan Severn. It got passed to Mark Coleman. Insert Mark Kerr. Bring in Kevin Randleman. By the way, what's Randy Couture up to? There was this era of the sport that if you were the dominant wrestler, you were going to win. And I came up in that very era. So when that quit being true, and that ceased to be true by 2005, I mean, that was a distant memory by 2005. I stayed locked on that concept in 2015 before I realized, hey, Chael, you're stuck back in the time when you came into the sport. And I only say that because I don't know when Coach Berriman came in. I don't know. But there was a time, much like the dominant wrestler that then went away, there was a time when the well-rounded guy took over. As a matter of fact, that's who took it from the wrestler. Maurice Smith showing an ability to not be taken down versus Mark Coleman changed everybody's mind. You fast forward a little bit, you get guys that do get taken down, but they find out how to get up off the bottom. And that is what stopped the dominant wrestler and got passed to the more well-rounded guy. But the well-rounded guy, I would really challenge, do you believe that that's still here? Because most do. Most do. Is that right? Well-rounded is a very bizarre statement. It truly is. If you're a well-rounded guy, that means that you've shown that you're a well-rounded guy. If you showed that you're well-rounded, you have failed at being dominant. Period. If you're ever a guy that got a submission from his back, but he's also got a knockout on his feet, like that's cool. That will put you in this category if he's well-rounded. He's a really good fighter everywhere. And it's also somewhat rare. But if you're a dominant guy, you don't ever have to show it. You wouldn't know if a guy was well-rounded if he was dominant. There was a make-believe land, just to take you back and try to prove my point, that George St-Pierre could only do one thing. He could only take you down. Now, that was believed because he had X number of fights, and he had taken everybody down in every single fight. He never did anything else, but he finally ran into a contest against Matt Hughes, who was an excellent wrestler, where George couldn't take him down. So George just went ahead and knocked him out with a head kick. And all of a sudden you go, oh, geez, it's not that George isn't well-rounded. It's that he's never had to show it. He has such a dominant skill in one area, he never needed to mix it up. It turns out he does have the stand-up skills. Fast forward George's career, just to stay with that, he ends up in a fight. Part 2, Josh Koscheck, hard time taking him down. Does more and better work with a jab than anybody has ever done prior or since in our sport. There has never been a time in our sport. That's a boxing phenomenon. It's a 100% boxing phenomenon about how effective the jab is. That is not true in MMA. That has never been true in MMA. It's not true right now. But it was put on display in dominant fashion one time. It was George St-Pierre against Josh Koscheck. So again, the world got reminded. Like, it's not that he's not well-rounded. It's that he is so good in one area, he turns to it over and over. So I bring that up because you never really know who's most well-rounded. And once you do know and you think that you're complimenting a guy, I see it differently. If a guy was really good at something, you would never know what his skills are. There's 3 dimensions of the fight. You're on your feet, you're on top, you're on bottom. That's it. If you get a guy with a beautiful record who has only shown you one of those skills, it doesn't mean he doesn't have the other 2. It means he's so damn good, he hasn't needed to turn to that yet. You get a guy that's well-rounded, he's doing it every single fight. He's on his feet, he's on the ground, it's a mess, he's getting knocked down, he's knocking you down, it's back and forth. That guy's fun to watch. But if you make believe in your mind that that guy's better, what's better about that? What is possibly better about that? Interesting argument, isn't it, by me? And I'm trying to think over champions that we have, where is it true? It has been true. It exists for sure. Demetrius Johnson comes to mind. The greats to have ever done it. But where is it? Is it more true than it's not? I mean, within Coach Berriman's own stable, his prized pupil, Israel Adesanya, is a kickboxing specialist. Now, he has found a way to stop those takedowns 90% of the time. And he has found a way to get up from the bottom of those takedowns 90% of the time. But if you go and watch what Adesanya does, not only to win rounds or exchanges, but the fight as a whole, it is an extremely dominant display of stand-up fighting. If you were to look at Khabib, the most dominant fighter ever, there's nobody that would look at him and say he was well-rounded. Now, you would come to a very false sense if you thought that he wasn't. If you thought that Khabib was not in the practice room working absolutely everything, you would not understand. You would be wrong. However, if you did deduce that he was a specialist, extremely strong in the takedown and bludgeoning area, that's fair. That is what he did. But he was so good, he didn't have to show anything else. And I think if you do now apply that to Islam, we don't know where Islam's at on his feet. You can say Islam can't fight on his feet because you watched him 10 times and he never fought on his feet. You could say that, but you could come to a different conclusion, which is how amazing Islam's stand-up defense is. Because he's never been hit, never been kicked, never had a combination landed on him, never lost a round, never been knocked down, never had a black eye, and never been hurt on his feet. That would also be true. Definitely it would. So it is very interesting. The make-believe land that the specialist gone, that's true if you finish the thought. And the thought has to be, if you came from one field and you were awesome, but you didn't understand the rest of it, you will not go very far. There was a time when you would, back in the 90s. You will not go very far today. You will not make it to television, for sure. But if you do understand those realms, you do practice them, you are comfortable, there are many people that could go on and have a beautiful career and never once show them. So the concept and the idea that well-rounded is better than being a specialist, I would push back. I would challenge greatly. I think that your eyes are deceiving you. And I think that if you went and looked in just to the history of the sport, just the numbers, just sat back, watched some tape, put in mark in each column, your specialist is doing a lot better and going a lot further than this well-rounded guy. Well-rounded guy had no choice. He's largely defensive, largely. All right, we're going to fight on the feet. I'm ready for that. Oh, we're going to fight on the ground. I'm ready for that too. But he's reacting. He's reacting to the other guy who's better at making the determination. I don't want to be the guy that gets dictated to. I want to be the guy in control. That's my own opinion. Philosophical, right? It's a philosophical debate. But martial arts is philosophy. Bruce Lee didn't know a damn thing about fighting. But Bruce Lee is remembered very well by the fight community because his philosophies were correct. He was the first to come out and say, learn everything if you would like to. Don't close your mind to any skill. And when it comes to competition, grab whatever it is that works. As simple and obvious as that sounds, Bruce is the one that first said it. He was met with a lot of resistance at the time. People thought that was unloyal. You got to spend, the Taekwondo guy should never spend a day in a karate room. Like, people really believed that. Bruce didn't. So we look at him fondly, even though he couldn't fight. And the only reason I even dragged Bruce into this is to just prove the point that we're not arguing here. We're discussing a philosophy, but philosophies in this sport are paramount.